Hello, and welcome to In Focus. I'm glad you're with us. And today we're tracking how global alliances and hidden financial networks are shaping the war against Ukraine. Tonight we will talk about how Russia is using a massive shadow fleet to fund its military machine, and how Ukraine and its partners are pushing back. And also, what's behind Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko's high-profile visit to North Korea, and what it means for global security. Let's get started. Russia's war effort depends not only on weapons, but on money. And a significant part of that money is moving across the seas, often in the shadows. Ukraine says it has identified one of the Kremlin's key tools to bypass sanctions. More in our next report.
Russia has deployed more than 1,500 vessels of its shadow fleet, which allow the Kremlin to bypass international sanctions, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. Revenues from these shipments finance the production of Caliber missiles, various types of drones used by Russia to attack Ukraine, and payments for military contracts.
Ukraine is advancing cooperation with partners on a strategy to counter the shadow fleet, coordinate joint actions at sea, and strengthen sanctions. Over 610 shadow fleet tankers have already been sanctioned. In addition, under the guise of civilian tankers, the enemy can conduct reconnaissance in maritime areas or transport dual-use goods, from a statement by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Ukraine and the European Union are preparing a plan to confiscate oil from vessels of the Russian shadow fleet. This was announced by President Volodymyr Zelensky. The plan involves creating legal mechanisms that will allow EU countries to seize cargoes if it is proven that they are linked to violations of the sanctions regime or hidden schemes for exporting Russian oil. The mechanism could include detaining tankers in ports, as well as blocking vessels operating without insurance, with transponders turned off, or sailing under flags of convenience.
They systematically transport not only Russian, but also Iranian oil. These are real allies, Russia and the Iranian regime. Even in something like the Shadow Fleet, they essentially share everything. And while destroying one such evil, the Iranian regime, we must remember that the second evil must also face appropriate pressure. As long as the war continues, as long as the strikes continue, pressure on the aggressor must also continue. We are working with European countries so that their legislation allows not only stopping such vessels, but also blocking them and confiscating the oil.
Earlier, President Zelensky welcomed the detention of Russian shadow fleet tankers by European countries. This includes the sanctioned vessel Dana, which was sailing under the flag of Mozambique and was detained in France. The tanker was spotted in the Mediterranean Sea on March 20th. 3 days later, it was anchored in the port of Marseille and handed over to prosecutors for a preliminary investigation. This is already the third suspected Russian shadow fleet vessel intercepted by France.
The war involving Iran will not deflect France from its support for Ukraine, where Russia's war of aggression continues unabated. These vessels, which evade international sanctions and violate the law of the sea, are profiteers of war. They line their pockets while helping finance Russia's war effort. Emmanuel Macron, president of France, on X.
At the same time, according to Bloomberg, for the first time since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia is selling oil to India at a premium to the Brent benchmark. The price of a barrel of Urals on India's western coast exceeded $121, the highest level since the end of February 2023. This happened after the U.S. Treasury temporarily eased oil restrictions on Russia on March 13th amid escalation in the Middle East. Earlier, India had significantly reduced purchases of Russian oil due to fear of sanctions. However, leading Indian companies have now contracted about 60 million barrels of Russian oil for delivery in April.
The amount of crude delivered to India has rebounded in March, with ships diverting to the South Asian nation after the U.S. granted a waiver allowing refiners to buy Russian crude already on the water. Arrivals in the first 22 days of the month averaged 1.14 million barrels a day, up from 1.09 million barrels a day in the whole of February, from a publication by Bloomberg.
According to Fortune magazine, in just the first 2 weeks of March, Russia earned around $7 billion from energy sales. President Volodymyr Zelensky previously stated that the easing of sanctions has allowed Russia to increase crude oil sales and generate funds to continue its war against Ukraine. According to the president, in just 1 week, Russia launched more than 1,500 attack drones and nearly 1,300 guided aerial bombs at Ukraine, reported by Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.
While Russia relies on hidden networks to sustain its war, it is also strengthening alliances with authoritarian regimes, building a coalition that stretches far beyond Europe. One recent meeting is drawing particular attention. Discover more in our next report.
With an artillery salute and a military parade, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un welcomed Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko. The two sides signed an agreement on friendship and cooperation. The document provides for deeper political and economic ties amid global instability. Analysts say that North Korea and Belarus are becoming increasingly integrated into China's broader geopolitical project of building a so-called multipolar world. At the same time, Pyongyang already has a similar agreement with Russia, which has served as the basis for military cooperation, including the deployment of North Korean troops to the war against Ukraine.
From human rights abuses to close ties with Russia, these two countries and their leaders have a great deal in common. This meeting is nothing more than an attempt by dictators to prove that their countries are not isolated. From an ISW publication.
The talks took place in Pyongyang, where both sides stressed the need to strengthen cooperation. The North Korean dictator expressed full support for Belarus. He also said that North Korea opposes what he described as Western pressure on Belarus. Lukashenko and Kim Jong-un also visited the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, where Lukashenko laid flowers on behalf of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin at the mausoleum of North Korea's former leaders, The Guardian notes.
I don't think this cooperation has any major prospects because, as I've said before, North Korea is a very poor country, and economically speaking, there is not much to gain there. What Belarus may actually try to do is fit itself into the military-industrial cooperation between Russia and North Korea and extract some limited benefits from it. Another possibility is that North Korean workers could be brought to Belarus for labor.
Lukashenko's visit looks like a demonstrative turn away from the West, even though it came against the backdrop of attempts to improve relations with Washington. In March, the United States partially lifted sanctions on Belarus, specifically those affecting banks and companies in the potash sector, in an effort to restore dialogue with Minsk. In response, Lukashenko released more than 250 political prisoners convicted of so-called extremist crimes. It is precisely over deportations and the forced transfer of Belarusians within the framework of an international criminal court investigation that Lukashenko could face an arrest warrant. Two more possible warrants concern the illegal transfer of Ukrainian children from temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine to Belarus, and the involvement of the Belarusian regime's leadership in Russia's aggression against Ukraine.
These are three possible ways to hold Alexander Lukashenko accountable. The question will be how this is implemented. But Lukashenko is not the head of the Kremlin. He does not have nuclear weapons, so the chances of detaining him are significantly higher. Pavel Latushko, Belarusian opposition figure at the Regional Security Forum, Path to Freedom.
Alexander Lukashenko's visit to Pyongyang confirms that Belarus's self-proclaimed president is betting on an alliance with authoritarian regimes. In addition to the trip and the new cooperation agreement with North Korea, Belarus is also expected to host Russian infrastructure for controlling long-range drones used in strikes against Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about this. In this way, Belarus is becoming an increasingly active part of the military-political alliance of Russia, Iran, and North Korea, confronting the West.
Russia is planning the further deployment of ground-based control stations for long-range drones, both in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine and, specifically, 4 stations on the territory of Belarus. We will respond accordingly. I have instructed to inform our partners and media representatives of the data that we are able to make public. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The deepening cooperation between Minsk, North Korea, and Russia means not only political isolation, but also Belarus's further entanglement in the Kremlin's military projects. Reported by Karina Lalayan, UATV News.
These developments show a clear pattern. While authoritarian regimes are trying to coordinate and adapt, Ukraine and its partners continue to respond with precision, strategy, and growing international support. And that's what makes the difference. Thank you for watching In Focus. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and stay with us for more updates on global security and Ukraine's fight for freedom.